Hi, thank you for joining me in this episode of GradSWE UCLA presents Women in Science, We Have the Power to Change the World. My name is Yifan Gao, a PhD candidate from Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at UCLA. I'm also the International Student Event Officer at GradSWE UCLA. GradSWE stands for the Graduate Student Community of Society of Women Engineers. Our goal is to provide support to graduate students and help them shine in their future career. We are going to host a series of interviews to female scientists, and we hope we can encourage more women to join the community of STEM. Our guest today is Dr. Julia Huang. She is a staff scientist at Elector. She is currently a lead biomarker scientist for clinical programs in frontotemporal dementia and oncology. She is leading cross-functional teams in developing and executing biomarker strategies for phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. Hi, Julia. Thank you for joining me in today's episode.
Hi, Yifan. Thank you so much for this opportunity to join you today.
Yeah, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, of course. So my name is Julie Huang, and I am a biomarker scientist, which means that I actually work on a number of clinical trials focused on developing treatments for devastating diseases. And my role is to try to understand how we can extract the data from the clinical trials to understand if our treatments are having an impact on patients. So I've always been a scientist by training and have found my way through a number of different scientific fields that ultimately allowed me to end up here in the life sciences industry. So I'm happy to share more about that as we kind of get into this, but that's me in a professional nutshell. And then just personally, I grew up in Los Angeles and I'm a first generation college student. So my parents immigrated from China when they were pretty much adults. And then I was born in the US. And then we moved from Boston, where I was born, to LA, where we settled and spent most of my first, my childhood and my early adult years there. And then slowly made my way to the Bay Area, which is where I am today.
Wow. So if anyone is checking your profile, they will notice that you have already built up an impressive research background, academic background from bachelor in Caltech to Stanford, PhD in Stanford. So I know it's like a lot of people's dream school. So could you please share some stories of your research journey? I know you talk about like you are right now a biomarker scientist, and then like especially like how you transferred from geobiology, right? Geobiology to immunobiology.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's definitely it's been a fun journey now that I reflect on it. But of course, as many of us as we go through our careers, we oftentimes have these like pivot points and we those are some of the more stressful, and scary parts of our careers because it's kind of going into these unknowns. But looking back, it's definitely been a really fun journey. And a lot of people, I think, often will have these different pivots that really alter the course of their careers. So as I mentioned, I've always been trained as a scientist. It's been a dream of mine since I was a kid. And not quite sure where that initial spark came from, but I guess it was a curiosity for the world. But my first love in terms of science was actually astronomy, believe it or not.
Oh, it's like really different. Yeah.
Incredibly different. I really thought I was going to become an astronomer and wanted to understand how the universe started, how is it evolving, and where are we going? Like those were some of the big questions that were on top of mind. Because of that, I was looking into a lot of universities that would have great astronomy or astrophysics programs. So Caltech, right,
Yeah.
Caltech was
Yeah.
definitely one of those schools that came on my radar during high school, not as early as maybe some people. It's a small school. I like to say sometimes it's the MIT of the West Coast. But it's a phenomenal scientific focused university, and importantly, it has the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is what drew me to this school, was that they had a connection directly to NASA, and I thought this is what I was going to be. So Caltech was my dream school, and
Okay. Big Bang Theory fan, so Caltech.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love Big Bang Theory, so Caltech is definitely, yeah, the
Big
thing.
Bang Theory, yeah, they actually I think had some shots there while I was
Yeah.
an undergrad. So it was always
Oh,
interesting to see
wow.
them. Yeah. Actually, wait, no, it wasn't Big Bang Theory. It was another sitcom or a drama called Numbers, I think, that they would actually film on site. But yes, Big Bang Theory is
Yeah.
like focused on the kind of quirkiness of the culture there, which, I think as a nerd, a really proud nerd, that was always kind of a fun way to kind of make light of a lot of not only the talented students, but the creativity I think a lot of us have in doing some of those activities. But anyways, so Caltech was my dream school. Um, Honestly, though, I didn't think I would actually get into Caltech. That was a place that a lot of people said, is such a small school. They only admit a certain number. And having grown up in Los Angeles as an inner city first generation low income student, it was a dream I had that fortunately I was able to gain a lot of support from teachers to encourage me to continue on for that dream. But I could have imagined, many scenarios where I could have just said, I don't think I would be good enough and just stop there. But I'm glad that I didn't. And I'm glad that Caltech did recognize my potential and allowed me to consider joining their school. And I did 4 years there. And my first summer, I had the opportunity to work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is exactly what I had wanted. And I knew that that would be important to see what it would be like. And lo and behold, after the summer, I had a fantastic summer there. I worked in an engineering team. We were trying to design an imager that would go on one of these Mars missions to look for signs of life on the rocks. But after that summer, and after having spoken to some of these people there who were astrophysicists, I came to the realization that perhaps the thought of being an astrophysicist was a bit more glamorous in my head than it was in real life, and that perhaps for myself, given where I was, it wasn't quite the career that I wanted to actually pursue. And this was incredibly important. I tell students that I mentor now is that even when you have a particular dream or a goal in mind, it's so important to test it out and get as much information as possible through firsthand experience, because it might really change your perspective. And if it does, like it did in my case, it's totally okay to change your mind, even though it seems like a very scary thing. And it was, because every single personal
Yeah.
statement I wrote was to be an astrophysicist. But I made that decision that, okay, this is not what I'm going to pursue. So then the ultimate question was like, okay, then what? What do I do
Oh,
going into
yeah.
sophomore year?
Yeah, I totally, yeah. My first option is to be in the architecture.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but right now I'm an environmental engineer, so totally different.
Yes.
Yeah, and there was like a couple of reasons behind that, but just long story short is I changed the option. So
Yeah,
yeah, it was
exactly.
pretty scary at the first time because I don't know what's environmental engineering is. I love arts. I want to do architecture, but yeah, I totally, yeah.
Yeah, it is scary once you decide that you want to change, because then, you have no idea where you're going. But at the same time, it's also exciting because you realize, okay, now I get to
Yeah.
explore again
Yeah.
and try to determine what is the right path for me. And so that's what I did. As a first gen student, oftentimes we might think of it as being a deficit, like, oh, we didn't have parents or family members who knew about college, so having to figure things out. But I would say one of the biggest strengths of being a first generation college student is learning how to find information because we
Yeah.
have to be resourceful, right? And so I kind of put that skill to the test once I decided I wasn't pursuing astrophysics. So I started going online, seeing the websites of different departments. And I was fortunate to have come across this public lecture that given by a professor at Caltech, Diane Newman, who is a professor of geobiology. And she gave this talk about the importance of microorganisms and specifically bacteria and how
Mhm.
they have shaped the Earth's environment as well as human health.
Yeah.
I recall her saying specifically how she was appalled that everything that we encounter nowadays is antibacterial, but in fact, just a very small percentage of bacteria are actually disease causing.
Yeah.
Most of these bacteria are not harmful, and some are actually beneficial for us, right?
That's true. Yeah. That's
So
what I'm studying. Not bacteria, but fungi. But my group is studying bacteria. So yeah.
got it. Yeah. So, fungi too, we think of only the ones that cause a disease or, ailments, but so many of them are necessary for a thriving ecosystem here on Earth as well as in our bodies. So, seeing her talk really sparked that interest in me and thinking about biology and geobiology. And I actually asked if I could work in her lab for a little bit to gain biology experience. And I was very fortunate that she agreed, though she had already decided to move to another university at that moment, but had asked that if I was interested and very committed, she would allow me to work in her lab for 2 months. And I took that opportunity. And I would say after that experience, it completely solidified my desire to continue pursuing the fields of microbiology. But I also had the challenge there was that I knew 2 months later she was going to be gone, and then I had to figure out what do I
Yeah.
do. So through a series of serendipitous events, I actually met my longer term mentor at Caltech, who is actually a new professor at Caltech. I kind of like telling this story, so maybe if you don't mind, I'm going to just share it.
Please. Yeah.
I was going to different events on campus to try to look for professors and understand which the different departments and what they do in terms of research. And so there were these tea parties that were being held at this professor's home where they were inviting students as well as faculty members from different departments. So I attended the biology or the geology one first, I believe, just to check that out and meet the professors there. And I also attended the biology one because I wanted to see what, that department was like. I went to the biology one. I remember talking to a few professors thinking like, interesting research, but nothing really striking, like in terms of the conversations. So I was heading out of this party, and I decided to go and, before leaving, thank the host for organizing such a great event. And so when I went up to her, she had just this new professor had just arrived and she was speaking with him. So she introduced the two of us, and I got to talking to this new professor, Sarkis Mesmanian. And in talking with him, I learned about his research on understanding how beneficial microbes impact human health. How do individual bacterial species influence the development of our immune system, and how he also studies this through the use of germ-free animals, which completely blew my mind. I never heard
I
of.
never heard of those research. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically it's like the bubble boy, these mice that are completely naive of bacteria. They're reared in the sterile environment, and this allows us to be able to study how individual strains of bacteria can influence the development of the immune system in these animals. Because in normal animals that are exposed to the environment, they get colonized with bacteria right away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, the microbiome and
Yeah.
hard to study because there are over 500 species of microbes, and how do you understand the contributions of individual species. So this is an interesting model that allows you to, in a very controlled manner, see how specific species impact the immune system's development. So it blew my mind, this concept. And as a sophomore at that time, I was just like, this is so cool. And I went home and I remember thinking like, I want to work with this professor. And so fortunately, like I was able to get some projects going in his lab. And then ultimately, I spent 2 years in his lab. My last 2 years at Caltech was working in his lab, studying how these really cool microbes in the gut impact the development of the immune system and then the overall health of the animals. And in the context of humans, of course, now we appreciate there are a lot of diseases, not only in the gut, but other diseases as well that can be influenced by the gut microbiome.
Yeah.
So that changed, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, of my.
Biology to immune. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
So,
really cool meeting, I would say. Yeah.
yeah, it was a very
Yeah.
serendipitous event. The serendipity there, I would say, was that if I had left the party 5 minutes earlier, I would have completely missed
Yeah.
meeting him. And so that was really, just sometimes I like to say, we might say that was lucky, And there was certainly an element of luck, but I like to think that, luck is really when preparation meets opportunity. So you have to be prepared. And for me, it was showing up at the event, putting
Yeah.
yourself out there a little
Join
bit
a
to
networking event is also super important for undergrads and also for graduate students.
exactly it
Yeah.
for your whole life, actually. I mean,
Yeah, that's true. Networking and you will meet new people and then there will be opportunities, right? Yeah.
exactly. So that was a really great lesson for me to learn. Just, it's scary to put yourself out there sometimes, but putting yourself out there is the preparation you're doing. And then when an opportunity comes, you're ready to receive it. And
Yes.
so that was a really good lesson for me to learn early on. And so I worked in his lab for 2 years, really built my skills in the lab, as well as this great interest in understanding biology and in particular microbes and how they impact human health. And so that was really phenomenal. And, I always think it's funny going from wanting to study the farthest and largest things in the universe, the galaxies and stars, to studying the closest and smallest things you
The
can imagine,
microbes, yeah.
microbes. But that's how things work sometimes. And it's good for us to always assess and think about where it is that we want to be. So after Caltech, I actually did take a year off. I was fortunate through Sarkis's guidance to he encouraged me to apply for a fellowship where I would be able to go and do research abroad. So I applied for a Fulbright and was fortunate to have received one to go to Germany to do research. And Germany was fun in so many ways, and from both the scientific standpoint, but also just understanding a whole new culture and
Yeah.
way of living. I highly encourage people during college, if possible, to either study abroad during the university time or to apply for some of these fellowships. It's really phenomenal. And doctoral students may also be able to apply at least for Fulbrights if their thesis work
Yeah.
can tie into a specific lab abroad.
I think one of my lab mates got a Fulbright and she
Oh,
went to Israel to
fantastic.
study abroad. Yeah. I don't have the fortune because I'm a international
Oh,
student, but yeah, I'm
yeah,
already studying abroad. So
it is. Yeah,
yeah.
you're already studying abroad. Exactly. This is your study abroad experience. So I think that was a really phenomenal experience for me to learn how to be on my own, to learn how to do science at this international level, and it also brought me into a love for microscopy and being able to visualize
Oh, yeah.
intricate interactions between microbes and their hosts. So I was at a Max Planck Institute studying how deep sea marine invertebrates survive in these harsh environments. I kind of went back to a little bit of the geobiology side, knowing because actually I had also applied for graduate school at the same time, and I did get accepted to Stanford, and I decided to defer once I found out the Fulbright was an opportunity I could pursue. And so I knew I was coming back to Stanford to study human medicine, medical microbiology. And so for the Fulbright, I decided, let me go back to my
Yeah.
geobiology roots and be in an environment where I can study these other really interesting and perhaps simpler systems of symbiosis, this connection between the microbes and the hosts.
The
Um,
oh yeah.
yeah, and the idea was if we can understand some of those concepts from these simpler marine invertebrates, we might be able to understand how, microbes interact with a more complex organism like a human. So I went to the Max Planck Institute for Marine Microbiology in Bremen, and they are very well known for instituting a technique called fluorescence in situ hybridization. They basically use this to visualize where bacteria are living in marine invertebrates like deep sea mussels, tube worms that live in the mid-Atlantic ridge. Yeah, and these are incredibly harsh environments. There's no light, high
Yeah.
pressure. There are toxic gases coming out of the hydrothermal vents, methane and sulfide. So how in the world are these organisms surviving? Well,
You actually dive into to the sea?
I didn't dive, but yes, you go on these large
Yeah.
cruises that are 6 weeks long in the summer, and then you'll have an ROV, which is a submersible that goes down deep into
Goes down. Oh, okay. Yeah.
but a person is in there. One or two people could be in the submersible. You go
Oh,
down,
who had license, right? Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
have like a robotic arm that will
Yeah.
grab a chunk of rock, and usually
Wow.
that's what you bring back and fix these specimens right away because there's no way to culture them in
In the
an
lab.
aquarium.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't simulate the pressure and, you know, the
The
environmental,
yeah.
exactly, the environmental conditions that are deep there. But it turns out that a lot of these organisms can subsist in this harsh environment because they have bacterial symbionts living inside the cells. And so that was really cool. And the way we understood and studied them was through fluorescence in situ hybridization, where we can visualize through microscopy where are these bacteria residing. We can make these tags that identify specific species of bacteria, and they can light up in different colors. So by sectioning, you know, we fix these organisms like a mussel, deep sea mussel. We can section them and then stain them for these different microbes, and then you visualize where are they located within the context of the cells that make up the actual mussel. So we were studying how bacterial symbionts were being transmitted. That was one of the questions that I was interested in, was transmission. And the idea was maybe we can understand something about the transmission in these mussels that might inform how bacteria might be transmitted from, you know, mother to baby in terms of humans too.
Like horizontal transfer or something.
I'm
not
vertical transmission and
yeah,
horizontal.
vertical transmission. Yeah, and not
Exactly.
horizontal. Yeah, vertical transmission. Oh, wow.
Exactly. So we were trying to understand how that you know, process might be working. Of course, it was challenging in that we couldn't conduct experiments. Ideally, you can conduct experiments to really test, but being able to visualize was so powerful. And I bring it up because sometimes you don't know exactly what you might want to pursue. And sometimes it might simply be, you know, a project that allows you to study by, you know, some part of science in a particular way. And for me, microscopy became this, you know, fascinating way of studying biology. And so that really influenced how I was thinking about my graduate studies when I went to Stanford. I ultimately chose a lab that specialized in confocal microscopy to be able to visualize how, in this case, it was a bacterium that lives in the human cell, Helicobacter pylori. Trying to understand how does the bacteria survive in this harsh environment of the stomach. So, you know, I went from studying the bacteria in these harsh environments,
Yeah.
deep sea mussels,
Yeah.
and now studying how bacteria survive in these in the
In the
deep
stomach.
sea environment of the stomach, I guess you can imagine.
Wow, I can see your like geobiology background actually benefit your graduate study. It's
Yes,
not, you know, separated. It's connected. They're connected,
is.
right? Like, wow, I think like your Fulbright experience actually influenced your graduate lab choice. Yeah. It's
It
really,
did. It
yeah.
definitely did. And I think that's kind of where sometimes you just don't know how these opportunities might play into
Yeah.
future decisions, but it really did help me develop that love of microscopy, which then I really pursued then in choosing the lab that I did at Stanford. And even though it was, yes, medical, microbe, and thinking about more infectious disease, I had so much fun, you know, understanding how this microorganism, H. pylori, survives in the human stomach. And we did a lot of imaging techniques to try to understand its interactions with cells as well as with signals. And for me, that was my thesis, was trying to understand what are the environmental signals the bacteria are sensing through chemotaxis, this process of sensing for the bacteria. It's like their nose of how they smell the different, you know, signals in the environment. And how does that allow them to find a niche in the stomach where they can be safe? So that was a really interesting thesis project that I worked on, and it helped me really cultivate this love of microscopy and thinking about how these intricate interactions between the bacteria and the human host, you know, what that could look like in this system, at least, where it was somewhat simpler, not as many bacteria reside in the stomach as in the gut. So studying H. pylori made it a little easier to understand the complex interplay between microbes and the human host.
So like there's actually bacteria growing in our stomach. And if we're eating different foods, they will sense different signal. And
Yeah,
actually gonna alter the microbiome in our stomach. And eventually
that's
it will affect our health.
Yeah, so the stomach is really interesting. A lot of, because of the food we ingest and anything else that we might ingest, it is constantly exposed to different microbes. But many of the microbes that get into the stomach will die. That's the process. That's the purpose of the acid that we produce. It's
Yeah.
meant to sterilize. But some bacteria have evolved ways to survive in the stomach, and most other bacteria that might survive actually don't even stay in the stomach. They go on into the colon where the pH is more closer to neutral. So they might have mechanisms that allow them to survive transiently in that harsh acidic environment, but then they'll make their way into the colon. H. pylori, though, this is what's interesting, is it doesn't go further than the stomach. It's learned to survive in the acidic environment of the stomach, and it doesn't do so because it's an acidophile. So some bacteria actually love living in acidic conditions, but H. pylori is not actually one of those bacteria. It needs to also be at a pH of around 7. And the way it survives is that it has evolved to find its way to the stomach tissue, where there is a pH of around 7, because our own tissues are protected from the acid it produces by a mucus layer. And so it's a really
bacteria. Yeah.
It is. And so it senses acid as a repellent. And what my PhD thesis work identified was it also senses another molecule called urea that our cells can produce as a stable kind of byproduct of degradation of macromolecules, protein macromolecules. It actually senses urea that's coming from the cells as an attractant. And so H. pylori can integrate these signals, the repellent from the repulsion from the acid and the attraction to the urea that's coming from the cells. We hypothesize that that's how it may be finding its way to the cells, where it ultimately needs to be in order to survive. And so
one tiny bacteria can do so many things.
Yes, and they really are phenomenal. And when we think about the ways they do it, there's so many things that we can leverage as we study these quote unquote simpler organisms. But, I like to say even CRISPR, right, is a revolutionary tool that we now use for editing DNA. It evolved in bacteria. It's the bacterial's immune system to protect against viral infections. And so this is so, just thinking about how these complex, intricate, processes that evolve in simpler organisms like bacteria can have profound, applications.
Like so many applications. In CRISPR has been a really big name, I think, right now. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So I think, this is, it brought me to Stanford, and then I went and did a postdoc at Amgen, which is an industry, and I'm happy to share a little bit about that too. But essentially, I realized at the end of my PhD that I had a great understanding of microbiology, but I actually kind of lacked the understanding of how the immune system worked, and specifically in the context of its interplay with microbes. And so I pursued a postdoc at Amgen to really gain immunology experience and learn all the skills that are necessary to be an immunologist. And so that's what that's what led me to Amgen. And I wrapped up there almost after 3 years, and then pursued a scientist position at a company that was actually focused on CRISPR, and really helped to develop some proof of concept studies there, and enjoyed that experience of really being able to build out a scientific program along with the team that I worked with. And then after that, it brought me towards the pandemic, actually the year of the pandemic in 2020, when I had a desire to also see what is beyond research in the life sciences industry. What is that process of drug development beyond research? And so I wanted to go into what we call clinical development, which means taking scientific research, creating a molecule or some sort of modality as a drug, and then testing it in clinical trials in the patients that you ultimately want to help. So now I'm in this role more on the clinical side to try to understand how do potentially new therapies impact the patient population that we're targeting. So it's been a little bit of a long introduction, but hopefully that helps kind of provide some context and some of the lessons learned along the way. But yeah, please let me know what you would like to expand on, if there's some particular areas that you'd like to hear more about.
It's been a long but amazing life story. I think it's like you started from geobiology and then gradually transferred to immunology. That's, some people might think it's impossible, but I really think it's like it's destiny for you. Like you actually, yeah, the mentorship. So I have like a few questions about the mentorship because I know you are devoted to mentor the students from like, especially from humble background, and then to guide them to have like a STEM field. But I think your story has already covered that question, is how mentorship is really important for the future life choice. So I'm gonna ask a question about industry and academia because you are my second guest in this channel from the industry. So what's the what factor, because you didn't talk about like what factor like affected you to choose to be like in the industry, and what
Yes.
did the life like differ from academia and
Right.
working in a company? Yeah.
Right. That's a great question. And it's really key question oftentimes for PhD students, postdocs. That question of, do I leave academia to go to industry? And what is that like? I would say one of the most important things, and again, it kind of stemmed from earlier experience, that Jet Propulsion Laboratory internship I did really helped me think about how important it was to get experience to understand what the potential new opportunity would be like. Similarly with industry, I had a lot of colleagues and friends who were pursuing their next steps in industry. But for me, to be honest, I had always thought about pursuing academia. I wanted to be a professor, and I thought that would be a great role for me, given that I enjoy mentorship and teaching and wanting to do research. It seemed like a really, perfect opportunity, career path for me. But basically, at the end of my PhD, I started thinking about what would it take to pursue an academic career. I knew that a postdoc would be necessary. I also knew that given the kind of the limits, these positions in academia don't come very often,
Yeah.
right? And so I saw how certain friends and colleagues of mine had to be very flexible in their geography to be able to accept a position. And I
Wow.
started thinking a little bit more about that and whether that was something I was willing to do. It was very close to my family who was still in Los Angeles, and I kind of thought I really want to stay in California. And so I decided that, industry was a place that I never had gotten that much exposure to. I really didn't know what it was like to be a scientist there. You hear people say, oh, you're going to the dark side, or you're no longer going to be able to do interesting science. And so those were concerns I had, but I thought, it's important if I can actually see for myself, what is it like to industry. So before I graduated, I actually pursued an internship at a company, Genentech, here in the Bay Area, so that I can actually see what is it like to do research at a company. So I was very fortunate to be able to also get that experience right before I graduated, with the support of my PhD advisor too. And I do think that was important, actually, being aligned with your advisor to know that this is something you want to actually consider and explore. So I went and did this summer internship, 12 weeks at Genentech, and it really allowed me to see that there was actually quite a lot of freedom too doing research at a company, depending on the size, of course. And a place like Genentech, it also was a little bit more, they're known for promoting kind of their own internal exploratory research, which was really awesome. It's a great part of the culture there. But, I recognized that there was still a lot of freedom that you can have pursuing interesting questions from a scientific standpoint. But at the same time, you also don't need to necessarily do it all on your own anymore. You can have a lot of different team members with different expertise helping you with moving a certain project forward. And then, of course, the goal is projects won't just go towards publication. They will hopefully go and become something that leads to a new treatment that will ultimately, be tested in patients. And so after that internship, it really helped me kind of dispel some of those thoughts that, oh, you can't be creative, you're not going to be able to do interesting work when you're in industry. And then also importantly, it helped me realize that actually what I wanted to pursue next in my career was to get this immunology experience. It really solidified my view that that was going to be an important step for me, because I was actually in a microbiology focused department. And while I was a good fit there from that standpoint, I realized that the projects that I wanted to work on really were going to need more of an immunology background because I wanted to understand how microbes interact with the immune system. So I decided that I needed to pursue a postdoc. That was another thing. A lot of times people might pursue postdocs because they, it's the next thing, but and they don't want to make the decision yet of academia versus industry. I highly recommend to people that if there is a way to be more intentional while you pursue a postdoc, that's the best way to go about it. And so for me, it was important that I wasn't just going for a postdoc to delay the decision or because, I didn't want to do a particular role. I wanted to make sure that I had a true motivation and goal for that postdoc. And for me, it was pursuing and understanding immunology.
So you did a postdoc in a company,
I
like
did.
not the research institute or university. So I
Right.
think because you just answered, I think because one of the biggest concern for a PhD student is whether we will have freedom in industry to do the research. You just answered that. So for the next step, doing the postdoc, I think most of my colleagues, they selected a university or at least research institute like Berkeley Lawrence Lab or so, but I never heard someone chose to stay postdoc in a company. So what's the difference?
Right. And at the time when I pursued this postdoc, I think it's still Genentech was really well known for a postdoc program in industry. But since then, there's actually been a number of different companies, larger companies usually, that have an official postdoc program. And it has been more so maybe here in the Bay Area, given that there's so many companies. But Amgen's actually down in Thousand Oaks in Southern California, closer to you, and they do have now a postdoc program, and I think it's really industry, they recognize that there are a number of students coming out of their PhDs that may want to pursue life sciences industry, but don't have that exposure yet. And so more companies have started to offer these programs as a stepping stone to get that exposure into industry and hopefully, be a transition for them into a more permanent role. For me, I was, to be honest, still on the fence of academia versus industry. I interviewed with postdocs both in academic universities as well as companies. And the reason why I chose this postdoc was first and foremost, it was because it was an immunology lab where I knew I was going to get firsthand experience in the lab working with immune cells. That was for me the most important thing, was to get that skill set. The second point was that I was working with a scientist, a very accomplished scientist from Genentech who had just moved to Amgen. And I knew that he has a really good publication track record and still high impact, journals and such. And so I thought that if I worked in his lab and continued to publish, it would still keep the door open for academia. So that was part of the reason why I also joined this lab, even though I know that going into industry does put you at a disadvantage for pursuing academia. Again, first and foremost, as I explore the different labs I was interviewing with, this was the lab I knew that I would get the actual firsthand experience in immunology. So I decided that, might as well, that was the main reason. But then also being in industry was kind of an additional perk for me to be able to actually see what it's like and to have some of the resources that industry would offer in terms of pursuing the science. And so I did join Amgen as part of their inaugural postdoc program, actually, here in South San Francisco, and was able to really learn so much in those 3 years almost in this group. I was amongst a lot of really just talented immunologists that actually came from academia. And, I felt like I just was continuing to learn. But this was one of the biggest pivots I made, was going into industry as well as changing from microbiology into immunology. It was a really large, big pivot because I had to learn a whole new language that is immunology, and then see what it's like to actually work in industry, which had different priorities and a different way of communication as well of the science. So I ultimately, after that position, I came upon the next role kind of also serendipitously, but that position at the CRISPR company allowed me to bring back my microbiology training from Stanford and use it along with the immunology training I was getting from Amgen to work on a project to look at how we can engineer microorganisms as a potential therapy for cancer patients. So I thought that was a really cool role
That's
for me.
definitely is exactly the project you want to do. That's what you
Exactly.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that one really came out of the blue in a way. And when I had this opportunity to join, I decided I really needed to go and pursue it. And so sometimes, again, it's good to have a
Yeah.
path in mind and a plan, but don't be afraid to pivot and make changes when opportunities come up.
Yeah.
This position at Caribou Biosciences really came up unexpectedly. And so in some ways I did leave that postdoc a little prematurely, but at the same time, I had almost 3 years there. So I felt that I had enough of the experience to be able to be an independent immunologist, which is what I had to do at Caribou because it was a smaller company, a startup. I essentially was the immunologist in the team that I was working on, and I was hired to come and build out a lot of the models that we were going to use to test these engineered microbes.
So I can understand like why you chose the postdoc position in industry, because it's actually gonna give you the skill set and then give you some, I would say, gap time to like think about whether to go academia and industry, also get a lot of exposure from industry. So I think that's like really new options for, I guess, for my audience or people around me, because like I said, I never heard like someone chose to go to industry for the postdoc. But if there's like a really good opportunity, I think they should go for it. Yeah.
Yes, definitely explore it. You're
Yeah.
right. It did give me time to think about things too. Oftentimes I see again colleagues that might do that with
Yeah.
academic postdocs, and it's okay as well if that's what you ultimately need. But
Mhm.
I would say because that postdoc experience sometimes in academia could be almost the length of a PhD, right?
That's true.
Um,
Yeah.
it's really important to think about what is it that you truly want to get out of that experience from a scientific development perspective, because you're putting in a lot of extra time that you might be able to do some other things into gaining additional
Yeah.
skills. And
Skill
so
set. Yeah.
that's, yeah, so that's where it's really good to think about what is the area you want to broaden into and how is that going to fit into your research interests and your research agenda, perhaps like that you want to pursue.
Yeah, like the to serve the ultimate goal, like all
Yeah.
those choices. Yeah. So I'm gonna jump into our next section. Is for the our organization GradSWE UCLA. Is we are Society of Women Engineers. So I know you have done a lot of service for female scientists and also humble background students to pursue STEM majors. So I was wondering, like, as a female scientist, what challenges have you met in the way that you made these big decisions, whether you said it's like a pivot or to serve the ultimate goal? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, female scientists, it's still as my I remember having this conversation with the CEO of Caribou, um biosciences, that hopefully one day we don't have to identify ourselves as a female scientist. But for now we do, because we do need to make it known that we do have challenges that we face specifically. Um, I went to Caltech, which is actually really infamous for the ratio. It's gone so much better now. Now the incoming class is more 50-50, but when I went to Caltech, my incoming class was 33% female and the rest were male. And you can really see it and feel it. And honestly, I even had someone at the very beginning of my freshman year, a fellow classmate who was a man. And, we were talking about schools that we got into, and he asked if I got into MIT. And I remember telling him, like, yes, I did. And he actually said, oh, I got waitlisted, but, MIT needed more women to be admitted
Oh,
into their
yeah.
class. And so,
Yeah.
you get these comments,
Yeah,
and
that's true. Yeah.
and a lot of times at that moment, it was my first time even hearing such a thing. And I was just like, oh gosh, is that true? And maybe it is true. And that can affect your confidence, right? But you learn over time as you get through these challenges that you are definitely making it through because you are putting your own grit and perseverance into it, and you have the skills to make it. I think the challenge for female scientists is really changing other people's conceptions of what women can do and what we're like, especially also, I have to say, as an Asian American woman too, Chinese American for me personally, I've been thinking a lot about also the intersections of the identity of being Asian as well as being a woman. We kind of have a double layer of bias that can come against us.
Yeah.
Asians are thought of as being quiet, the really good busy bees that do the great work, but may not be leadership material because we don't speak up and we don't, or the thought is that we can't speak up, and the thought is that we work on the details but not think about the bigger picture, the strategy side of things. And so those are biases and stereotypes that we need to break. And I would say a lot of the work I've been doing more recently has been to bring awareness of these misperceptions and help broader audiences understand that we do indeed have leadership within us skills, and that we can actually do quite a lot, and we can voice our opinions, and it's a matter of sometimes having allies, I would say. Sponsors at work in particular. So sponsors are people who go beyond just giving you guidance, which is what we think of when we think of mentors. Sponsors actually are going to advocate for you when you're not at the table. They will think of opportunities that would be a good fit for you and then make sure that you are considered for those. And so being able to find your sponsors within your organization is really key. And there are people out there, but you kind of have to put yourself also out there a little bit more vulnerably and ask for that help. And so for now, I think the challenges that female scientists do have is changing that misperception. And then for young people in particular, I think seeing the role models do make a huge difference. I went to Caltech also because my first interview there, or my interview weekend, I met two women who had gone to Caltech, pursued a PhD at Princeton in astrophysics, and then were working as professors of astrophysics. And I just, in talking with them, I thought, I want to be in their shoes, and so there's so much power in seeing role models, essentially. And Diane Newman, the first professor who gave me that opportunity to work in her lab, has continued to be a really, phenomenal role model for me too, as I think about how to be a great scientist. So those are some of the challenges, but we do have so much, we've made a lot of progress as well. And I think more and more people are recognizing that female and scientists have this other set of things that we have to do, and that we have to maybe work 10 times harder to be able to get the same recognition. Of course, we also have the experience of, wanting to, if we want to have families, that's a whole other
other consideration.
Exactly.
So I totally agree on what you just said. So I have a bunch of friends, like Asian female friends, who just don't believe in themselves that can do STEM major, but I feel, or they can break the stereotype. So I think that's one of the reasons why I start building up this channel, is to give broader audience the access to a lot of amazing female role models that both in academia and industry. So they will know what's their life like, and then their research stories or their life stories. So they will know, it's possible. I can also put myself into their shoes, like you just said. So I think you just bring the next questions. What role models have you looking up to when you are growing as a scientist? So I think you just answered that.
There have been a lot. And, I think importantly with role models and mentors is it's important to continue the connection, even past the immediate relationship you have. It doesn't have to be, of course, constant, but I know now as a mentor, I love when mentees come back and share with me what they're doing and what they're thinking about. And so that's the one thing I would say about mentors and role models is that, if you have a connection that you find to be, really unique and special, continue to keep that connection. I still keep in touch with, even my second grade teacher. She was one of the first role models and, mentors that I had. And I love being able to just connect with her, even though now it's been so many years since then.
Same. same. I'm still connecting with my elementary school teacher.
Yeah, that's
Many
amazing.
years, yeah, because she gave me the opportunity to put myself like actually on the stage to be the host of big events. I was pretty scary at the first time, but she kept giving me the opportunity because she said she saw the potential in me. So
Mhm.
I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
So I'm still keeping in touch, like 20 years almost, I would
For
say.
sure.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And those are the pivotal experiences that
Yeah.
you have that really shape how you develop. And so she saw that potential in you.
Yeah.
That helped you gain your confidence being on stage and,
A lot. Yeah, I was pretty shy. I remember, I know it's part of my story is to I was pretty shy, but I had the eager to like show myself and actually, speak up. But
right,
I didn't get any opportunity before she actually was
right,
my like and teacher. So it's actually shaped myself to be a totally different person, I would say. Yeah.
right. That's amazing. That's awesome that you have someone so close to you like that who made such a big impact early on.
Mentorship is actually really crucial.
It
Yeah.
is.
Come
It
to that
really,
conclusion, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So my last question is, do you have any advice that you would like to give women that are currently or thinking about pursuing STEM majors?
I would say that my biggest piece of advice is to really stay curious and to not be afraid of exploring new options. I think, especially when you're early on, figuring out what you want to pursue. Again, it's always great to have a plan in mind, but not everyone has to have a plan from the very beginning. And sometimes it's really those unexpected experiences,
Yeah.
as I have shared, or these unexpected topics that really strike your curiosity in a particular way. I never thought I was going to study microorganisms. In
Yeah.
fact, I can share that when I was in high school, I much more preferred studying chemistry or physics than actually biology, because I thought, oh gosh, there's so much to memorize in biology. It's hard to understand how you kind of get
Oh,
to where
yeah.
you are. Like it was different, right? From an analytical perspective compared to something like chemistry. And I remember studying very little bit about bacteria and just thinking, oh, these are so strange, like the names I can't even pronounce.
Yeah.
And so I never thought I was going to study biology, but because I was at Caltech, and again, because of Diane's talk, it
Yeah.
totally changed my perspective and helped me think about, wait, maybe I should really think about what bacteria are doing in this world, and how are they influencing the Earth's environment and human health. And so I think keeping that open mind is really key as you explore, and then leaning into that curiosity is really big too.
Mhm.
And so that helps you kind of figure out where you might want to be. And then the other piece of advice is really seek out those mentors, those professors, because ultimately, even regardless of where you are in terms of doing science, a lot of times it still comes down to a lot of the relationships that you are building. The people you work with, the people who are helping you pursue your area of research, it's going to make such a big difference in your overall experience as a scientist and as a STEM major. So I would say leverage and really cultivate those relationships that you can develop with professors, with your peers, with the TAs. There are different people at different stages of their scientific training. And it's really fun to actually kind of learn from a lot of these different people as you kind of figure out your own career path. So I would say those are the two things. Stay curious and
Open mind. Yeah.
be open, keep in mind in terms of what you pursue. And once you kind of gravitate towards an area, really find those people that will help support you as you figure out more of what your career path is going to look like for yourself.
Mentorship and also stay curiosity. Yeah. Stay curious. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for this amazing interview. I would say you shared a lot of experience of yourself. I really think that will help my audience to probably shape their academia choice or their personal life choice. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Yifan. It's really amazing that you're putting together this podcast to bring, more of the experiences to your broader audience. And I do hope that some of the stories I shared today will resonate with some of your audience members and help them think about how they can pursue their own careers in STEM.
Definitely. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Thank you
Thank
and bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Women in Science. We have the power to change the world. Please hit the subscribe button and follow us to hear more stories from female scientists.